This is Akashvani. In the program Spotlight, now we bring you a discussion on the importance of strategic relations between India and France. The participants are Anil Wadhwa, former diplomat, and Simran Sodhi, journalist.
Today we are discussing the relationship between India and France as Prime Minister Narendra Modi leaves for France tomorrow, where he will be there for 2 days, July 13th and 14th. The Prime Minister is the guest of honor this year at the Bastille Day parade. We also see this is an indication of the deepening of the bilateral relationships between India and France. Ambassador Wadhwa, when you look at the India-France relationship and the Prime Minister's visit, how much significance do you attach to the fact that he will be the guest of honor this year? And how does this add on to the strength of the bilateral relationship?
So it's not common for foreign dignitaries to be invited as guests for the Bastille Day as a guest of honor, and Prime Minister Modi is there in this capacity as the second time. In fact, this is a great honor as far as India is concerned. And I think also the fact that there is a 269-member tri-services contingent this time is indicative of the fact that the French side aims at honoring all three wings of the Indian security forces. There's also a connection between, because nearly 1 million Indian soldiers in the First World War and 2 million in the Second helped secure peace in Europe at critical moments. And Prime Minister Modi has sought to remember and respect India's consequential contribution to European and global security. In fact, when he was there last in 2015 on one of his visits, he had also visited the memorial of the Indian soldiers who fought for Europe in the First World War. And he paid homage to our fallen men worldwide, and that has become part of our diplomatic practice since then. So I think it's a great honor for India to be invited to take part in the Bastille Day celebrations along with our Indian contingent.
Ambassador Wadhwa, when we talk of India-France relationship, the one thing that is coming right at the top these days is the defense cooperation between the two countries. And also, it is likely that we will see some major announcements, some major deals that are signed between India and France. How do you see this defense cooperation and the likely purchase of the Rafale M by India? How does this close defense cooperation then bind the two nations even together?
So I think defense cooperation, of course, there is going to be a number of new agreements that will be announced. And defense is going to be a major part of that, defense and space combined. And also the relationship is going to be taken to a new strategic partnership level. So it's not just about what advanced technologies that Paris can give Delhi in terms of defense equipment, but it's also the fact that there's going to be a lot of emphasis this time on creating value supply chains and on defense co-production in particular. Co-production and co-design, and then Make in India, which is going to be in focus. And that is why, although the Defense Acquisition Council has, in principle, given the approval for the 26 Rafales for the Indian Navy and also 3 Scorpene submarines to be built for the Indian Navy in India, I think the nitty-gritty still has to be agreed upon. And that's why the government is being very cautious about these announcements. It will depend a lot on how the negotiations go. And as I said, it's important that India gets a good deal in terms of manufacture in India. We all know that the Mazgaon docks, for example, has the capacity now, having already built 6 of these Scorpene submarines. So the 3 new ones, if the deal goes through, are going to be much more sophisticated and also will give a further boost to the, not only to Mazgaon docks, but also to the general capacity that India has now in this field. So definitely defense is going to be an important component of this visit.
Ambassador Wadhwa, we also see that this visit is likely to include, there are going to be multiple meetings such as a private dinner which will be hosted by the French president. There is going to be a joint meeting with CEOs. A state banquet is also in the pipeline. Would you say that France also, in a way, reaching out to India as India emerges globally as a stronger and much more influential voice than what we saw maybe a decade back?
So certainly as far as France is concerned, India is seen as a very important strategic partner, just as India sees France as an important strategic partner. So there is interest on both sides to make sure that the visit is extremely successful. You rightly pointed out that there are multiple engagements which give the visit a very comprehensive feel about it. And besides the state banquet, President Macron is also hosting a private dinner for the Prime Minister where they would discuss in the more intimate atmosphere world developments and the important issues that don't get discussed in the bilateral delegation level talks. But more importantly, I think it's the question of inviting 200 CEOs from both sides at the banquet, which will be hosted by President Macron, and also the individual meetings that will take place where both President Macron and Prime Minister Modi will participate, plus the separate emphasis that has been laid on selective meetings that the Prime Minister will have. This is very much a focused visit, not only on defense, but also on the trade and investment partnership. And more importantly, within that, on the space economy, new space economy, also on startups, which will for the first time come under more focus, which has not been the case before. For example, India has been giving a lot of emphasis on participation in Viva Tech, which is a French premier institution for new startups. And this is a new dimension in the relationship. The space economy dimension will be new, and there we expect some more agreements to be announced.
Ambassador Wadhwa, how much do you think will the Ukraine factor play when the Prime Minister holds talks with the French President? Because we have seen now the Ukraine conflict has gone on for more than a year and everyone seems to be sticking to their positions. And we also see that the French President has been reaching out to different parties. He's also been in touch with Moscow. How do you see the Ukraine conflict somehow figuring in the talks or playing in the shadows when this visit takes place?
So I think Ukraine would definitely figure in the bilateral discussions. You see, the war in Ukraine has given India a rare political incentive to recalibrate its European strategy. In fact, since the second half of the 20th century, unfortunately, Delhi has seen Europe through the Russian eyes. And this does not mean, however, that Delhi will not start viewing Russia through the European eyes today. But at the same time, without taking sides between Russia and Europe and Ukraine, India also needs an integrated view of European security. And that would be provided, during these talks because President Macron, as you rightly pointed out, has been in touch with both sides. He's been trying to find a solution to this conflict from the very beginning of this conflict, in fact. And we all know that sooner than later, Ukraine, Russia, and Europe will begin a formal exploration of the possibilities for a negotiated settlement. So, just as China is positioning itself for such an eventuality with its so-called peace plan for Ukraine, India has big stakes in European peace. It can be equally valuable, if not a better interlocutor between the West and Russia. And so, the working with Europe on the Ukraine question should be one of the aims of this visit. And also, this will give India a deeper engagement with the European security institutions. So it's one tremendous opportunity, I would think, for Prime Minister Modi to play that role during this visit. And this dialogue with President Macron would be very important in that context.
Ambassador Wadhwa, we also see that the French have also said that on this visit, they want to take forward the Make in India idea. And France will just not, sign defense deals with India. It also wants to move to now co-development. How important do you think this is that finally we are talking of a co-development, a sharing of technology between the two countries?
So I think India has always been pressing all its defense partners on this question of co-development, co-designing, and joint production. And the Atmanirbhar Bharat question keeps on coming up during these talks because otherwise the bill for defense equipment will keep on mounting. So that's very important that India has its own capabilities, develop its own capabilities for the future so that it does not depend upon other countries forever for its defense procurement. And in terms of the future, France is a very important partner. It seems to have realized that this is the way to cooperate and to make sure that it is ahead of the game as far as other countries are concerned with India. And therefore, we can expect that these talks on the jet engines and also on the procurement of Rafale aircraft and the Scorpion submarine, they all proceed on the same lines. In fact, it was some months ago that Safran had already announced its intention to work with India and to make with India and at the same time to shift most of its production here for the Indian market. So we'll have to see how this goes. But I think the emphasis is on this aspect And it's good to see that the French side has also come up with a similar kind of position now.
Mr. Wadhwa, how much do you think will China also figure in the talks? Because we've seen that the world generally seems apprehensive about China, which is growing fast, which has its own expansionist ambitions. We've seen India in a tense relationship with China over these last few years. The West, especially Europe, also seems to be in a very tense relationship, even though the French president has made the reach out to China. How much do you think would the China factor be there? And do you see India and France also coming together with a common perspective maybe on how you deal with a growingly aggressive China?
I think our Prime Minister Modi would undoubtedly want to understand better President Macron's positions on China that have actually generated some controversy in Asia, if not in Europe and the United States. He would definitely want to know how serious France and Europe are on de-risking their economic ties with China and also diversifying their Asian commercial engagement with India and other partners. So in that sense, what is happening between India and China would be also of great use to President Macron. And how we are dealing with the border question with China would be equally important for him. But at the same time, I think a future strategy on how to deal with China, what is our perspective on China, and learning from President Macron about their future with China and their perspectives would be extremely important. But I think by and large, it is quite clear to Europe and the world now that the aggressive policies of China need to be countered. And this is the reason why France, as a major partner of India in the Indo-Pacific, have already signed a number of MOUs which point towards greater interoperability, and also a logistics agreement that has been signed between India and France is done keeping in mind the future expansionist policies that we are going to see from China and to take care of that contingency. So in that respect, what would happen in the future would be a very important question to discuss, and what is a strategy that the two governments can evolve as a joint strategy perhaps to deal with China would be equally important.
Ambassador Wadhwa, we also see that it is expected that during this visit we might have agreements where it would make it easier for Indians to go and study or to work in France. This people-to-people exchange is what we refer to. How important do you think this is for the relationship, that this people-to-people exchange goes up? Also that these visas and restrictions maybe ease up and it is easier for Indians to work in France or to study in France?
So I think on your first question about student visas for Indians to study in France and making it easier as far as the visa regime is concerned, I have no doubt that there would be a meeting of minds on that. On the second question about allowing Indians to work in France or increasing number of Indians to go to France and work there, I think given the background of what has happened in France in the recent few weeks, there would be some amount of hesitation from the French authorities now to ease up on that question so easily. Of course, India and France have been talking about migration issues and service providers from India going into France for a pretty long time now. So there is some amount of understanding, but it has to be a general policy the French had to adopt to the outside world. But as I said, given the recent incidents in France and the rioting which has taken place, I don't expect an immediate breakthrough on this question. At the most, I think the two sides will agree to keep talking about it, and perhaps we'll have some breakthrough at a later stage.
And in the next 2 days, we will continue our discussions on the Prime Minister's visit to France and the agreements and the many other positive outcomes that are expected during the visit. With these comments, we bring today's discussion to an end. Thank you.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on the importance of strategic relations between India and France. The participants were Anil Wadhwa, former diplomat, and Simran Sodhi, journalist. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of Akashvani. You can listen to it on our mobile app, News on AIR. This program is also available on our YouTube channel, News on AIR Official. You may share your feedback about this program through email at airnsdtalks@gmail.com or WhatsApp on 928-909-4044.